The following program is presented by the Theosophical Society in America.
Welcome to this series on Foundations of the Ageless Wisdom. I'm Dana Ivey. Anyone who has spent even a little time browsing through theosophical writings will see that there are wonderful treasures of wisdom to discover. And yet, with so much available, how is one to begin an intelligent study of theosophy? What should one read? And how does one interpret the sometimes obtuse statements made by early theosophical writers? How does any of this information apply to daily life? In this 5-part series, Ed Abdill attempts to establish a foundation for theosophical study. He will explore insights he has garnered in over 35 years as a member of the Theosophical Society. These 5 programs were recorded in front of a studio audience and are based on lectures Ed has been giving for many years, both in New York City, where he lives, and throughout the country. Much of his time will be spent introducing us to and exploring the 3 fundamental propositions given in Madame Blavatsky's proem to The Secret Doctrine. Such an approach is not without merit. Blavatsky herself, when speaking to students, said that reading The Secret Doctrine page by page, as one reads any other book, will only end in confusion. The first thing to do, she said, even if it takes years, is to get some grasp of the 3 fundamental principles given in the proem. Ed will be using these 3 propositions, as well as other theosophical ideas, to develop a framework for a theosophical worldview. What we hope emerges is a kind of theosophical lens through which one can explore life more fully. Throughout, Ed will be correlating this worldview with modern scientific theories. It is also hoped that you will take advantage of the study guide which accompanies this videotape series. Exercises follow each program. By doing these, either as part of a study group or individually at home, you may greatly enrich your understanding of the concepts presented in the programs. In any event, have fun with these materials. They are intended solely as guideposts for your own individual explorations of the ageless wisdom. For now, however, let's go to Ed Abdill for part 1 of Foundations of the Ageless Wisdom.
In approaching this course, one might reasonably ask, how can an understanding of the most abstract principles have anything to do with or any use in our personal life? Isn't it really enough just to live a kind, productive, wholesome life? Isn't it really enough just to love? Isn't it really enough just to be good? Well, maybe it is. But what is the good? That really is not so easy to answer, perhaps. To do the good, it seems to me, we must know what the good is. Let's take a very simple example. Let's say that a very kind-hearted woman living in New York City loves plants very dearly. And she's given a flowering plant one day that is just beautiful. And she loves it very, very much indeed. And she wants to do good by that plant. And so she assumes that the plant should be watered every day faithfully. She loves it. She talks to it. She sings to it. Everything she can think of. but faithfully waters it every day. And at the end of a week or two, the plant is dead. Why? It was a cactus. She didn't know what the good was. Even if we want to do the good, you see, we must know what it is in order to do it. That seems obvious when we think about it, but we don't very often. In this course, what we'd like to do is to point the student toward what we might call the ultimate good. We're not going to spell it out, but we want to point the student in the direction of the ultimate good, that they might come to reach it, understand it in some way in their own experience and being. We're not talking about the sentimental good with which we're all familiar. We're not talking about the good that changes from person to person, from culture to culture, because it's defined differently, isn't it, by different cultures and by different people. One person thinks one thing is good and the other person thinks that's not good. We're trying to point the students toward an ultimate source of good, really in Plato's sense, not that sentimental sense, but in Plato's sense of the good, which means the eternal, that which never changes, that which is immutable, unspeakable, unthinkable, the ground and source of being. That's the good to which we want to turn our attention.
Madame H.P. Blavatsky, co-founder of the Theosophical Society, refers to this ultimate good in the first fundamental proposition as, quote, an omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle on which all speculation is impossible, since it transcends the power of human conception and could only be dwarfed by any human expression or similitude. It is beyond the range and reach of thought. In the words of the Mandukya Upanishad, unthinkable and unspeakable, unquote. This omnipresent, eternal, and boundless principle, referred to by Madame Blavatsky, is said to be similar to the notion of the pre-Big Bang void of modern physics.
Both physics and theosophy suggest that everything has arisen out of complete emptiness, the stillness of the infinite, undifferentiated space. That being so, you see, then that void or that emptiness is not really empty, except in the sense that it is no thing, but it's actually the plenum as well. Because within that darkness of everlasting space lies the potential for everything that is, for everything that can ever be, and that includes you and it includes me. Now, if that is the ground of our being, if it's the source of everything, if it's that to which we want to turn our attention, the ultimate good, the real, the eternal, the one, why does H.P. Blavatsky say it's unspeakable and unthinkable? I think there's at least two reasons for that. First of all, it's the nature of our mind. Our mind understands or knows by contrast, isn't that so? We can know black because there's white. If we're in a train moving along, we know whether we're moving or not by the contrast, don't we? And sometimes we get confused and we think, oh, we're moving. And when we look more closely, we see that the other train is moving. So we know that we're moving by contrast. If we were absolutely alone in the universe, if that were possible, and you could still be quite peaceful and happy and content and alive, which of course is quite impossible, but let's imagine that it's possible, and there was no other thing, no stars, no sun, no nothing. How would you know whether you were moving or standing still? You couldn't, could you? There'd be no wind, no breeze, no movement. You're immobile. You see, our mind knows by contrast. Now, in that undifferentiated, eternal, boundless, infinite space before the universe comes into existence, there is nothing. No existence. Just eternal non-being, which yet somehow mysteriously is the only being. And so we can't think about it or speak about it because every word we use is a contrast, isn't it? The second reason, I think, that it's unspeakable and unthinkable is perhaps best seen by an analogy. Any eye, whether a human eye or an animal eye, any eye at all, I think I can safely say will never see itself. It will see itself only by reflection. There may one day be instruments so magnificent that we can look into them and see every subatomic particle of our eye. Wouldn't it be fascinating to do that? But what we're seeing is not our eye, is it? It's the reflection of our eye, an exact image of the reality, but not the reality itself. This eye, therefore, will never see itself. And in that same way, you and I will never know the ultimate real because we are it, in that very same sense. Now, the great mystery is, why did this background void or ultimate reality spring into existent being? Why did that happen? When HPB was asked that question by a student, she said, "Don't ask me, ask Parabrahm." And Parabrahm is the Hindu name for that first fundamental proposition, the ultimate, unspeakable, vast reality that nothing can be said about. It's a kind of unanswerable question, why? Yet, from our limited human point of view, I think we can say perhaps this: it appears to be its nature to do so. And there is nothing in the universe that can violate its own nature. We are what we are. We can't be giraffes if we're humans. Now, while we can't say too much about the why, I think we can say something about the how. And the secret doctrine does make an effort to tell us some aspects of how this universe comes into being. How, from the undifferentiated, unmanifested one, does the many arise, including you and me?
The secret doctrine asserts that the universe comes into being by a process of polarization. Imagine that the screen in front of you represents the eternal, undifferentiated reality referred to earlier. Within this void, a fundamental polarity arises. On one hand, there is the subjective side of the universe, and on the other hand, its objective counterpart. We might think of the subjective side as unconditioned consciousness, or spirit, while the objective side can be called the root or the possibility of matter. From this polarization, a strange kind of tension is said to exist between the two poles that might best be described as abstract motion. So according to the secret doctrine, these three aspects, spirit, the root of matter, and abstract motion, are the bases for all existence.
And these three are one. In Hinduism, it's thought of as the great breath. So the non-existent one, which is that undifferentiated, unspeakable space, has now become the existent one, because now we can say something about it. You see, it has three aspects. It has subjective, objective, and motion. There's something to say and to consider with our human minds. But it is still one. It isn't stuff yet, in our sense of the word stuff. It isn't thingness yet. Now, those three realities, or aspects of reality, subjective, objective, and the tension between them or motion, do not arise sequentially. I've had to do it that way, and we've done it that way on the diagram, haven't we? First showing one, then the other, and then the third term. They don't come into existence that way because they're an indivisible unity. They spring from the unmanifested one to the existent or manifested three in one at once, because they are not divisible. It's not dual, it's polar. Furthermore, that polarity does not take place as two dots, as we've shown on the screen, one here and one there. Rather, that polarity takes place at every point in the universe, at every point in that vast space. And when it happens, the entire space is brought into vibrant motion, so that the whole of it is revealing itself as these three aspects: subjective, objective, and now the reality of the whole thing from our point of view, motion, which is sometimes called life. There isn't any life without motion, is there? Interesting thing to consider. Now, a simple example might show how that can be. That is, how three aspects can be indivisible in one unity. If we take a bar magnet, with which everyone is familiar, and we let the north pole of that magnet represent the subjective side, or the subjective pole of reality, and we let the south pole represent the objective side of reality, and then we take the force field, which we see between the poles when we put iron filings, don't we, near the magnet. If we let that force field represent motion, then we will have an analogy of how the secret doctrine sees this unity in the triplicity. Now, let us say that we didn't know any better, and we thought we'd like to have a north pole in one hand and a south pole in the other. We would break the magnet, wouldn't we? And we'd say, now I have a north pole, and now I have a south pole. But you know it isn't possible, don't you? The minute you break it in half, you have another magnet here and one here. You have two magnets now, because you can't have the north pole without the south pole. So you see, there can be such a thing as a triplicity, which is yet a unity. All are present at every level of existence. It's a fundamental reality to which we don't usually put our minds. It's so fundamental that it escapes us. Everything is conscious. Everything moves. Everything is substantive. This is true, it's said in the secret doctrine, from the deepest level, from the most interior levels, to the most exterior levels. So all three of those aspects are present in an archangel and in an ant. They're present in a galaxy and in a grain of sand. There cannot be, according to the secret doctrine, consciousness without substance and motion. There cannot be substance or matter without consciousness and motion. Nor can there be motion without consciousness and substance. These three are one, and they're in everything. Now, this eternal reality, then, has become the existent. Non-existent space has become existent space with this polarization process. Now you might say, well, that's all very interesting theory, maybe kind of fascinating, but what, still I want to know, what does it have to do with me? What does it have to do with daily life? This idea of infinite space, which is the ground of being according to the secret doctrine. Rather than try to make a vain attempt to answer such a complex question, I would like you to do a little experiment, a very simple one which you can all do easily in your own minds. To begin with, let's consider the fact that this infinite space about which we've been talking is a far greater part of reality than the world with which we're familiar. I don't think we often think about that, do you? We don't stop to think that there's more space in the universe than there is substance. We don't stop to think that atomically our physical body is more space than substance. We really don't think about it. Oh, we know it because we've been told that by the science teacher in school. But it's a fact, isn't it, nonetheless, that we're more space than substance. And so in this exercise, what we're going to do is we're going to imagine, use our creative imagination and imagine that we're expanding into space. But more importantly, that we are the space. We identify with the stuff, you see, all the time, don't we? Let's identify for a change with the space, which is the greater part of us. Be the space. May I suggest that by identifying with space, the space of your body and the space of the universe, you have moved a little closer to the source of your own being. If you were able to do it even slightly, your mind became quieter, didn't it? Your emotions became more tranquil. And isn't that of enormous value to your personal life? By simply turning your whole attention to that most abstract principle, space, and identifying with it, you can bring that unspeakable peace that passes understanding into your own hearts here and now.